Hello and welcome to Psychgeist, where we talk about the psychology of the era, the science of games. I am your host, Dr. Rachel Kowert, and on today's episode of Academic Ramblings, we're going to be talking about the how and the why when it comes to the social impact of games. Together, we're going to explore three theoretical models that are most commonly used to explain the social uses and effects of video game play. These three models are the social displacement model, the social compensation model, and the cycle model of use. We will also touch on the social augmentation model. All of these models were developed to explain social differences between people who play games and people who do not, particularly in relation to online gameplay. While these theories largely grew out of the concern fueled by the stereotype of the antisocial, socially inept online gamer, the theories remain relevant today in the more nuanced discussions we're now having about online versus offline friendships and communities and communication. First up is social displacement theory. The displacement model, or the social displacement theory, was really the first one to emerge in the research literature in an attempt to explain social effects of games. Put simply, the social displacement hypothesis is the idea that online interactions displace offline interactions. That is, online communities thrive at the expense of face-to-face communities. This is really a model based on time in and time out. You're spending more time online, you're spending less time offline. You're spending more time communicating online, you're spending less time communicating offline. The reason this is a problem is because this model presupposes that online relationships and online communication is somehow weaker and less valuable than its offline counterpart. This is due to a lack of nonverbal cues, what's often discussed as weaker friendship social ties, among other things. Because of the displacement and the quote-unquote weaker social space, the players may suffer negative social consequences, often presumed to be things like the atrophy of social skills, the loss of close friendships, and the exchange of online for offline relationships. Then there's the social compensation model. A few years later, the social compensation model started popping up in discussions and research around game studies. The compensation model of use doesn't necessarily discredit the claims made by the displacement model, but rather aims to explain the potential motivations for engaging in online communication in the first place. The social compensation model argues that people choose to engage in online communities and may develop a preference for online versus offline communities over time because of pre-existing dispositions that make online communication desirable or more preferable. This could be a range of things. It could be related to mental health, like social anxiety or depression. It could be related to skill deficiencies, like lower social skills, or even environmental factors, like geographical isolation. According to the social compensation model, any significant differences that you find between people who play games and people who don't, or people who play online games and people who do not, can be attributed to something pre-existing. This is the major difference between compensation and displacement models, because the displacement model argues a more of a media effect, that because of the displacement, we see negative effects. Then we have the cycle model of use. The cycle model of use grew out of these discussions that vacillated between social displacement and social compensation when interpreting basically the same results. The cycle model of use asserts that players begin to engage with online gaming communities, virtual social environments, because of particular psychosocial predispositions. Again, this could be something like depression, social anxiety, loneliness, low social skill, geographical isolation, low self-esteem, a whole host of things, which may have contributed to poor real-world interpersonal relationships. This is the compensation component of the model. Once embedded in an online community, an individual may experience greater social success than perhaps they had in traditional contexts. And maybe because of the lack of nonverbal cues or the asynchronous communication or some of the other social accommodations that online gaming spaces provide. Because of these range of social affordances, combined with the online disinhibition effect, see the previous episode of Jargon Schmargon for more on that, fears of social repercussions can be alleviated, social self-consciousness could be reduced. While this might initially seem beneficial or compensatory, over time individuals may begin to place more value on their in-game social networks than their out-of-game social networks, simultaneously increasing their sense of online community while decreasing their sense of offline community with their offline contacts. This is the displacement component of the model. Over time, this process may exacerbate and intensify the psychosocial predispositions that brought them to online communities in the first place. Increased loneliness, increased depression, or increased physical isolation, for example. This could then further discourage individuals from forming stable, long-term face-to-face relationships. This is the cycle component of the model. The cycle model attempts to merge the two ideas, social displacement and social compensation, to explain why people might be highly motivated to engage in online communities in the first place, and then why over time they may continue to engage in online at the expense of offline communities. Unlike the displacement and compensation hypothesis, the cycle model of use delineates a sequence of events that motivates players to initiate and continue interaction within online gaming spaces. All three of these theories, social displacement, social compensation, and the cycle model of use, attempt to provide explanations as to why we see social differences, what would be traditionally considered social deficits, in online gaming populations. Then there's social augmentation, which I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention here. Social augmentation is the idea that online gaming spaces augment traditional social interactions. That is, they're not displacing or compensating necessarily, but rather for most players, they are simply an additional space to socialize. It is under this idea of social augmentation that we also find discussions of social learning, and why in some studies we see positive relationships between increased online gameplay and social outcomes. At the end of the day, online gaming environments are inherently social spaces and are conducive to various forms of social learning as they promote socialization and interaction. For instance, in the multiplayer game Fortnite, players compete in teams to complete objectives. They work together. In massively multiplayer online games like World of Warcraft, players often work together to achieve more complex goals. I told you all roads to game studies lead to MMOs. The need for social participation in online games provides individuals with real opportunities to learn and perfect various social skills. Collaboration, cooperation, leadership. Direct learning through socialization with other players, or indirect learning through the observation of other players, can promote the learning of effective social strategies, regardless of whether the communication happens face-to-face or virtually. But I will say that research examining the links between online gaming and social interaction has generally produced mixed results, ranging from conclusions that online social interactions contribute to social awkwardness and a decline in social skills, to the idea that online gaming may contribute to increased real-world leadership skills. That's something we're going to talk about in an upcoming state of the research. So, displacement, compensation, and the cycle model of use. These are the three most commonly discussed theoretical models when we talk about the discourse in and around the social uses and effects of games. Displacement is the idea that online communication is displacing offline communication, leading to negative consequences. Social compensation is the idea that a pre-existing negative condition or circumstance motivates engagement in online spaces in the first place. The significant difference between the social displacement and the social compensation models are the way that they interpret any negative relationships that may be found between gameplay and social outcomes. If players are found to have lower social skills, for example, in one study, or report higher depression or loneliness in another study, the compensation model would argue this was something pre-existing, whereas the displacement model would argue this is due to play, due to the displacement. The cycle model of use combines these ideas and argues that something pre-existing motivates engagement in online communities, which then contributes to greater success in online as compared to offline communities, which can then contribute to the displacement of offline interactions for online interactions and can potentially exacerbate what brought them there in the first place, and becomes a cycle. But let's not forget the flip side. Games also have the potential to augment our social experiences and provide a new outlet for social connection and learning, which I'd argue a lot of us experienced over the second half of 2020 during COVID lockdowns. I want to stress the importance of context. These theories are all contextual. It could very well be, and honestly I think it is, an interplay between all of these theories. We don't see gross negative social effects or drastically positive social effects necessarily either way in any particular study. For some, social displacement may be occurring to negative consequences, such as reduced friendships or increased loneliness. For others, games can be safe havens free from the repercussions of day-to-day communication. They can be compensating or augmenting. And for some, socialization in online gaming spaces could lead to a cycle model of use that exacerbates pre-existing dispositions. If you like this video and want to see more, please like and subscribe. And until next time, be excellent to each other and always cite your sources.